The morning sun rose over the village, painting the thatched roofs with gold and warming the dusty paths that wound between clusters of small huts. Children ran barefoot, their laughter ringing across the open fields, and the distant crowing of roosters marked the rhythm of another day. Yet within one particular household, the air was heavy with tension, as if the sun's warmth could not penetrate the shadows that lingered in its corners. In this modest home, a young woman moved quietly through her morning chores, carrying water from the well, sweeping the dirt floors, and tending the small garden that clung stubbornly to life behind the house. Her movements were deliberate and calm, reflecting a patience and strength that had been forged over years of quiet endurance. She was slight in build, with deep brown eyes that held a spark of resolve, and her hands bore the marks of hard work, yet her posture remained dignified. The stepmother watched her from across the room, lips pressed tight, her eyes narrowed in constant disapproval. She had always been quick to compare, quick to scold, quick to point out the smallest flaw, yet she never noticed the small victories, the quiet triumphs that her stepdaughter accomplished each day. Beside her, the stepsister lounged on a wooden stool, draped in a fine dress stitched by the village tailor, her face twisted in both envy and mockery. She observed the young woman with a mixture of disdain and fascination, as though she could not understand how someone so seemingly powerless could radiate a calm that made her own beauty and possessions feel insignificant. The household was a tension-filled theater of cruelty and jealousy, where every action and glance was measured, weighed, and judged, and the protagonist learned early to navigate it with quiet vigilance. Despite the harsh words and spiteful glances, the young woman bore no visible resentment. Her strength was not loud, it was woven into her patience, into her careful tending of the garden, the careful washing of clothes, the careful preparation of meals that were never met with gratitude. She moved through her days with a gentle resilience, understanding that the household's cruelty was rooted not in her actions but in the insecurities and greed of those who sought to dominate her. Outside, the village thrived in a chorus of activity, with merchants setting up stalls, neighbors greeting one another, and children chasing goats across the open fields. Yet inside the home, the air felt dense, almost suffocating, as if the walls themselves carried whispers of jealousy, envy, and unspoken malice. Her modest life had taught her to notice the small blessings, the scent of fresh earth after rain, the soft green shoots pushing through her garden soil, the way the sun touched the edge of the thatched roof in the late afternoon. These quiet moments became her refuge, a source of strength that her stepmother and stepsister could never understand. The young woman learned to move like a shadow within her own home, blending diligence with humility, always careful not to provoke anger, yet never allowing the cruelty to break her spirit. She carried herself with dignity even as she endured humiliation, and the villagers who glimpsed her on errands or at the market often whispered about her quiet resilience, marveling at the calm courage that shone from her eyes. In every corner of the house, from the creaking floorboards to the soot-stained walls, there seemed to linger a tension that the young woman had grown accustomed to navigating. She knew the stepsister's moods, the stepmother's sharp tongue, the way their jealousy would flare like a sudden storm, and she had learned to move around it, to survive and endure without retaliation. Her garden, her chores, her quiet routines became acts of resistance in themselves, evidence of a strength that could not be burned or broken, a hidden fire that awaited its moment to shine. And so she continued each day, patient, watchful, and quietly strong, a young woman standing tall in a household that sought to diminish her, her spirit untouched even as the shadows pressed closer around her. The household was thick with tension that morning, a quiet storm building in the small, dimly lit rooms where envy festered like a poison. Her stepsister, a girl consumed by jealousy, had spent the previous nights plotting, her mind spinning with resentment at the young woman who seemed to shine even in the shadows of their home. She was envious of the way the villagers whispered about the girl's beauty, the way her kindness reached beyond the walls of the house, touching even strangers who passed through the village. Each compliment, each gesture of respect she received felt like a dagger to the stepsister, and she had resolved that she would not endure the humiliation of being eclipsed, not by a girl she considered beneath her. Her stepmother, ever quick to exploit any weakness for her own amusement, had encouraged this envy, whispering cruel suggestions and egging her daughter on, until the plan took shape with a wicked precision. That morning, the stepsister waited until the young woman had gone to the well to fetch water. The house was silent, save for the distant caw of crows and the soft rustle of wind through the leaves outside. She crept into the room where the young woman's clothes were carefully folded, garments that represented her modest life and quiet dignity. Her hands trembled with anticipation as she set fire to the stack of neatly pressed dresses, watching with a cruel satisfaction as the flames licked the fabric and smoke curled into the corners of the room. She paused only briefly to savor the thought of the young woman returning and finding her possessions destroyed, imagining the panic, the humiliation, and the helplessness that would overwhelm her. When the fire had consumed enough to ruin the clothes, she fled to her stepmother, announcing the supposed accident, with a triumphant smile. The young woman returned, carrying water, unaware of the disaster that awaited her. She pushed open the door and froze, her heart sinking as smoke and the acrid smell of burnt fabric met her senses. Her eyes widened at the sight of her clothes reduced to charred remnants, the color she had cherished now blackened and unrecognizable. A wave of helplessness swept over her, but she did not cry or scream. She had learned early to control her reactions, to endure cruelty without granting it the satisfaction of visible despair. Her stepmother, feigning shock, tutored and scolded her for carelessness, while the stepsister hid a smirk behind her hand, delighting in the chaos she had orchestrated. The household had become a stage for humiliation, and the young woman was cast as the victim, powerless before the cruelty that surrounded her. Yet even as shame and anger rose within her, the young woman's spirit remained unbroken. She knelt amidst the ruined clothes, touching the charred fabric with a mixture of sorrow and quiet determination. She knew that her worth was not tied to the garments that now lay in ashes, nor to the approval of those who sought to diminish her. The villagers might see her as delicate or vulnerable, but she carried within her a hidden strength, a patience and resilience that no fire could consume. Her eyes, dark and steady, reflected the beginnings of a plan, a silent vow that this humiliation would not define her life or dictate her future. The household, unaware of the storm quietly brewing in her heart, continued their laughter and whispers, convinced that they had achieved victory. They mocked her behind closed doors, delighting in the imagined despair of a girl they believed weak. But in the quiet moments when she was alone, the young woman allowed herself to breathe, to gather her thoughts, and to search for possibilities hidden within the disaster. It was during these moments, while sifting through ashes, that her hand struck something unusual beneath the floorboards, a glint of metal, a worn leather corner, a clue forgotten by time and overlooked by her stepmother. Her heart quickened, not with fear but with hope, and a new determination settled over her like a cloak. The stepsister's cruel plan, meant to break her spirit and humiliate her, had instead become the catalyst for discovery. What was meant to diminish her had awakened her alertness, her resourcefulness and her resolve. Even as the household gossiped and plotted, the young woman felt the stirrings of a quiet triumph, hidden from the eyes of those who sought to oppress her. She would endure, she would uncover, and she would find the secret that had been buried long before her arrival, a hidden box that would reveal truths and power far beyond what her stepsister or stepmother could imagine. The fire had destroyed her clothes, but it had ignited her courage, her cleverness, and the first flicker of a reckoning that would one day leave the household and village in awe of her strength. The young woman could hardly sleep that night, her mind alive with the strange parchment and the mysterious clues it held. Every rustle of the wind through the cracks of the house seemed to whisper secrets, urging her to rise early and continue the search. With careful steps so as not to wake her stepmother or stepsister, she crept from the small room she had claimed as her own and retrieved the parchment. By the pale light of dawn, she traced the symbols and markings again, each stroke and curve beginning to reveal the subtle guidance of someone who had hidden the box long before her time. Her heart raced with anticipation, and yet she moved with the patience of one who understood that rushing could undo the delicate balance of discovery. Following the clues, she went to the far corner of the garden, where the soil seemed looser, as though it had been disturbed recently but hidden beneath years of leaves and grass. Kneeling on the cool earth, she brushed away layers of debris, her fingers trembling as she unearthed a small weathered trapdoor hidden beneath an overgrown patch of herbs. The box's location had been whispered to her by the wind, by the parchment, and by the quiet intuition she had learned to trust in her long years of solitude. With a mixture of awe and reverence, she lifted the trapdoor, revealing a hollow just large enough to conceal a medium-sized wooden chest, its edges worn smooth by the passage of time, its lock rusted but intact. She paused, breathing slowly as if acknowledging the presence of the past itself, the invisible hand of whoever had hidden this treasure guiding her now. Her fingers traced the carvings on the box's surface, delicate patterns of vines, flowers, and symbols she could not decipher but somehow felt deeply connected to. She realized that this box had been forgotten for decades, perhaps intended for someone worthy, someone strong enough to endure hardship and discover it. She felt an inexplicable reverence, as though the box recognized her courage, patience, and resilience, and had been waiting for this very moment. Her hands shook slightly as she pried open the rusty latch. The chest creaked, a sound that echoed through the quiet garden, and she slowly lifted the lid. Inside she found treasures that seemed both material and spiritual. There were letters, yellowed with age, written in careful, flowing script. Some addressed her ancestors, recounting deeds of wisdom, courage, and patience, while others contained guidance and blessings for those who would one day discover the box. Among the letters lay small artifacts, beads of rare color, small charms, and intricately carved wooden figurines, each imbued with meaning she could not fully understand but felt in her chest like a pulse of inherited strength. There were even coins and trinkets, symbols of prosperity and endurance, reminders that abundance could coexist with virtue. Tears sprang to her eyes as she lifted the letters, feeling the weight of history settle upon her shoulders. For so long she had endured humiliation, cruelty, and neglect, yet here was a tangible proof that her life was connected to a lineage of strength and wisdom, a reminder that endurance and integrity were never in vain. Her heart swelled with a mixture of awe, gratitude, and determination. The box was not just a treasure, it was a revelation. It confirmed that she was capable, worthy, and strong. The whispers of ancestors, hinted at in the parchment and felt in the quiet wind, now resonated clearly in her soul. She sat in the garden for hours, carefully examining each letter, each artifact, feeling as if the spirits of her ancestors surrounded her, guiding her hands and her thoughts. For the first time in years, the burdens of humiliation and fear that had weighed on her chest felt lighter. She realized that the household's cruelty, the stepsister's envy, and the stepmother's disdain could never diminish the strength she now understood she had always possessed. The box had revealed more than treasures. It had revealed the truth of her own courage, resilience, and innate worth. As the sun climbed higher, spilling golden light across the garden, she closed the chest with gentle reverence and tucked the letters carefully into her folds. The hidden box, untouched for years, had finally found its rightful discoverer. And in that discovery she understood that her journey of patience, cleverness, and quiet strength was only beginning, and that the power to transform her life, and perhaps even the household that had sought to diminish her, lay in her hands, guided by the wisdom she had just inherited. The garden no longer seemed small or humble, it was a sanctuary, a place where the past, present, and future intertwined, and where she could begin to claim the destiny she had always been worthy of. The morning after discovering the hidden box, the young woman returned to its contents with a mixture of anticipation and reverence. Each artifact, each letter, each carefully preserved object seemed to pulse with quiet significance, as if the hands that had hidden them long ago had entrusted her not only with treasures but with truths too long buried. She unfolded the oldest letters first, the edges brittle and faintly yellowed with age, and as she read, her heart tightened with both sorrow and clarity. The words spoke of envy, greed, and calculated cruelty that had long shaped her household. She realized that the stepsister's spite, the stepmother's manipulations, and the subtle undermining of her every effort were not random acts, but part of a pattern repeated across generations. These were lessons she was meant to see, lessons that revealed not only the failings of others but the strength she herself had nurtured silently over the years. One letter, written in careful script and addressed to the ancestors, told of a young girl, much like herself, who had suffered under the whims of a jealous sibling and a cruel guardian. The letter spoke of cleverness, resilience, and patience as the only weapons strong enough to survive such oppression. The young woman felt a shiver run down her spine as she realized that her endurance had not been in vain, that she, too, was part of this lineage of quietly courageous women. Every word seemed to echo in her mind, reinforcing the lessons she had learned through hardship, that patience could shield the spirit, cleverness could outmaneuver cruelty, and resilience could transform humiliation into power. Another artifact, a small carved figurine, seemed to depict a household much like hers, with a girl at the center, surrounded by figures whose expressions were twisted with envy and greed. She understood, with growing certainty, that these were not mere decorations, but symbols, messages left by those who had experienced similar trials. They were reminders that cruelty thrives in secrecy and that those who act with malice often leave traces of their intentions behind. She began to see patterns in her own household, the stepsister's calculated jabs, the stepmother's subtle undermining, and the ways in which the villagers were sometimes manipulated by their whispers. These revelations were not meant to fill her with bitterness, but to empower her with knowledge, to teach her that understanding the motives and weaknesses of others was as vital as nurturing her own strength. Among the letters she found confessions and accounts that exposed the stepsister's envy in its rawest form, deliberate acts of sabotage, whispers meant to humiliate, and schemes intended to make the young woman appear foolish in the eyes of neighbors. There were also instructions from long-forgotten ancestors on how to respond to such cruelty, guidance on patience, on timing, and on using the knowledge of others' malice to protect oneself and reclaim dignity without descending into anger or recklessness. The stepmother's schemes were laid bare as well, showing how she had used fear and manipulation to assert control, and yet also revealing her own insecurities and the fragile ego beneath her dominance. These truths, once hidden, now glowed with clarity in the young woman's mind, forming a map not just of deception but of opportunity. As she absorbed these revelations, a calm determination settled over her. She understood that her strength had always existed, quietly nurtured in the shadows of cruelty and neglect. The box had given her more than insight, it had given her the tools to act wisely, to reclaim her dignity and to shape her own destiny. She felt the pulse of her ancestors' guidance, whispering that patience, cleverness and resilience would allow her to turn humiliation into triumph, envy into exposure and cruelty into lessons for the household. In the quiet of the garden, surrounded by the gifts of the past, she allowed herself a small, confident smile. She was no longer powerless. She was enlightened, prepared, and ready to face her household with the knowledge that would ensure justice, restoration, and her own ultimate recognition. In the days that followed, the young woman moved through her household with a quiet, purposeful rhythm. The hidden box had revealed truths that transformed her understanding of the people around her, and with each passing day she began to weave subtle plans, acts of foresight and intelligence that would restore her dignity without sparking the immediate wrath of her stepmother or stepsister. She knew that rash confrontation could backfire, that anger and pride were tools her adversaries would use against her. Instead, she chose patience, observing their routines, habits, and weaknesses, all while maintaining the appearance of the same humble, compliant girl they had long sought to belittle. The first step in her plan was to reclaim small symbols of her authority and competence. She repaired what had been broken in the house, not to draw attention but to demonstrate reliability and care in ways that could not be ignored. She tended the garden with renewed diligence, ensuring that herbs, vegetables, and flowers flourished even under the watchful eyes of her stepsister, whose every glance was filled with simmering envy. When villagers came to barter or seek advice about crops and household management, she offered help with quiet confidence. Her knowledge, drawn from years of observation, combined with the wisdom hinted at in the letters and artifacts of the hidden box, soon became apparent to those who mattered. Word spread of her cleverness and skill, yet she never boasted, maintaining the guise of humility even as admiration grew around her. Using lessons from the box, she also began planting subtle challenges for her stepsister. She would leave small tasks incomplete in a way that appeared accidental, allowing the stepsister to assume responsibility and then subtly reveal her shortcomings. Each failure of the stepsister was noted in the village, whispered among neighbors and friends, without a word spoken by the young woman herself. This quiet method ensured that the stepsister's envy was reflected back upon her, showing the household and the villagers that cruelty and pride carried their own consequences. In these moments, the young woman learned not only the power of observation, but the satisfaction of using cleverness as a shield, a method to protect herself while revealing truths without direct confrontation. The stepmother too began to notice changes, though she could not pinpoint their source. The young woman's subtle efficiency, her grace under scrutiny, and the admiration she drew from the villagers created unease. The letters and artifacts had taught her patience and strategy, showing that timing was essential in dismantling schemes of cruelty. She learned to act indirectly, using the household's own dynamics against them, revealing missteps, and sowing seeds of self-reflection without ever appearing to challenge authority openly. Each small act of ingenuity built upon the last, creating an invisible net of cleverness that gradually restored her position within the household without overt confrontation. She also began communicating indirectly with the villagers, sharing knowledge, resources, and advice in ways that reflected her intelligence and compassion. Farmers noticed that the young woman's garden, nurtured by her hands and inspired by the wisdom of the hidden box, produced the most abundant crops. Mothers and elders sought her guidance in matters of household management and child rearing. Each interaction served a dual purpose, helping the community while demonstrating, quietly, her capacity for wisdom, leadership, and resilience. Her stepsister's envy grew sharper with each passing day, yet the young woman never gave her reason to confront her directly. Instead, she let the stepsister's malice unravel itself, using patience and foresight as her tools. By the end of several weeks, a transformation had taken place. The household, once dominated by cruelty and jealousy, was subtly shifting under the influence of quiet intelligence and well-timed acts of cunning. The young woman had reclaimed dignity not through anger or force, but through strategy, patience, and cleverness. Every smile, every helpful gesture, every carefully measured action drew attention to her strength, while her stepsister's schemes faltered without a word of direct accusation. She had turned the fire of envy into a forge of wisdom, learning to act not impulsively but with foresight, and to let the truth of her resilience shine through the smallest of victories. In this way the young woman's cunning plans laid the groundwork for the ultimate reckoning, a slow and deliberate unfolding of justice that would leave her stepsister and stepmother confronted by their own failings. The hidden box had given her not only knowledge but the clarity to act wisely, transforming humiliation into subtle triumph, and envy into revelation. Through patience, intelligence, and foresight, she was reclaiming her world one quiet, decisive step at a time. Word of the young woman's quiet accomplishments began to ripple through the village like a gentle wind stirring the leaves of the trees. At first, the villagers noticed only the subtle changes: her garden flourishing beyond expectation, the careful repairs she had made in the household, and the ways in which her presence seemed to bring order and calm where there had previously been tension. Mothers whispered to one another while tending their own homes, marveling at how she managed her chores with such grace despite the harshness of her household. Farmers, who had once barely noticed her, now sought her advice on planting and harvesting, impressed by the precision of her guidance and the abundance her small patch of land produced. The hidden box and the treasures it contained had become a quiet source of her wisdom, though she shared its lessons sparingly. The letters, artifacts, and coins had opened her eyes to truths about her own strength and the patterns of envy and cruelty that had shaped her household. Armed with this knowledge, she acted with care, revealing only what was necessary to demonstrate intelligence, patience, and courage. The villagers began to sense a depth in her that went beyond simple skill. They spoke of a quiet wisdom, a strength that had endured trials and emerged refined, like gold purified by fire. Her story, whispered from neighbor to neighbor, began to gain momentum, and soon the household that had once confined her in shadows could no longer hide her growing reputation. Her stepsister, once confident in her schemes and cruel triumphs, began to feel the first pricklings of guilt and unease. She noticed the way the villagers now looked at her half-sister with admiration, how they sought her guidance, and how the young woman's actions subtly outshone every attempt at jealousy and sabotage. The stepsister found herself shrinking under these looks of respect and admiration, her confidence faltering, while resentment twisted uneasily with shame. Every gesture she made now seemed clumsy, every plan she tried was met with quiet failure, and the villagers began to see her actions for what they truly were: envy, cruelty, and insecurity. The young woman, aware of the attention she was attracting, remained calm and patient. She never flaunted her discoveries or her cleverness, never boasted of the hidden box or the treasures it contained. Instead, she allowed her actions to speak for themselves: the flourishing garden, the clever handling of household chores, and the wisdom she offered in conversation with villagers. This patience and humility amplified the admiration of the people around her, creating a stark contrast with the stepsister's malice. Each whispered compliment and piece of praise directed at her was like a quiet thread weaving a tapestry of public recognition that the stepsister could not undo. Even the stepmother began to notice the change, though she tried to mask her discontent. The young woman's ability to navigate both the household's cruelty and the village's expectations had revealed a strength that neither envy nor fear could suppress. The stepmother's schemes now seemed clumsy in comparison to the careful intelligence her stepdaughter displayed, and the stepsister's unease grew into open guilt, though she could not bring herself to admit it. The villagers' whispers carried lessons that the household had failed to teach: that patience, faith, and cleverness earned respect, while envy and cruelty only exposed weakness. As the days passed, the young woman's presence became a beacon in the village, drawing admiration not only for her skill and intelligence but also for the quiet dignity with which she endured adversity. She had transformed her household's cruelty into a stage for demonstrating resilience and wisdom, turning every obstacle into an opportunity. And while her stepsister wrestled with growing guilt, unsure of how to respond to the admiration and respect her sister now commanded, the young woman's reputation continued to rise, proof that true strength is recognized not through force or confrontation, but through patience, courage, and the quiet mastery of one's own destiny. The day of reckoning arrived quietly, as if the sun itself had chosen to witness the unfolding of justice. Villagers gathered near the central square, drawn by whispers that something remarkable was about to happen. Mothers brought their children, farmers paused their work in the fields, and elders leaned on canes, their eyes bright with curiosity. The young woman, calm and poised, walked among them, her chest lifted and her hands folded gently before her. She carried no arrogance, no hint of malice, only the quiet confidence of someone who had endured cruelty and emerged prepared for the truth to be revealed. Her stepsister, meanwhile, fidgeted nervously beside her mother, trying to maintain a mask of superiority that had long been a shield against scrutiny. Yet as the villagers' eyes began to settle on the young woman, that mask faltered. The air felt thick with anticipation, and the whispers that had followed the young woman for weeks seemed to gather into a tangible force, pressing down on the stepsister's conscience. She began to sense, though she could not fully name it, that the power she had once wielded through envy and malice was slipping irrevocably into the hands of the girl she had sought to humiliate. The young woman stepped forward and raised her voice, not with anger but with clarity, letting the calm authority of her presence carry across the gathered crowd. She spoke of patience, of cleverness, of the enduring strength that comes from resilience and integrity. Then deliberately she revealed the contents of the hidden box, showing the letters, artifacts and treasures that had been carefully preserved for generations. Gasps rose from the villagers as they recognized the importance of what she held, proof not only of her own worth but of the truths long obscured by envy and cruelty. She turned her gaze to her stepsister, whose face had gone pale, and with gentle authority explained how the envy and spite that had once sought to diminish her had been laid bare by the very wisdom and patience she had cultivated. The villagers, now fully attentive, began to murmur among themselves, piecing together the years of cruelty the stepsister had inflicted. The stepsister's eyes darted around, seeking an ally, but found none. Every whispered encouragement or support she had relied upon had evaporated, leaving her exposed in the full light of scrutiny. Her stepmother's schemes were also revealed through the letters and artifacts, evidence of manipulation and favoritism that had long twisted the household's dynamics. The young woman presented each detail carefully, without accusation or malice, allowing the truth to speak for itself. The crowd, guided by reason and observation, saw clearly the injustices that had been hidden behind closed doors, and murmurs of approval for the young woman's composure and courage rippled through the square. The stepsister's malice, once sharp and cunning, had backfired entirely, leaving her vulnerable and exposed. As the realization dawned upon the household, the stepsister's guilt became unbearable. She lowered her eyes and stammered excuses that found no purchase among the villagers, who now recognized her envy for what it was, a destructive force that had been countered by patience, intelligence, and resilience. The stepmother, too, could not defend her actions, and even her voice faltered when confronted with the evidence the young woman presented so gracefully. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Where once cruelty had ruled, wisdom and courage now commanded respect and admiration. The villagers cheered softly, not for vengeance but for justice and revelation. Mothers nodded in approval, elders smiled knowingly, and children gazed in awe at the young woman who had faced humiliation and emerged stronger than ever. In that moment she was no longer the quiet, oppressed girl who had endured fire and spite. She was a symbol of patience, foresight, and inner strength, a living reminder that cruelty cannot prevail against wisdom and resilience. Even her stepsister, though humiliated and guilty, could not help but feel the first stirrings of understanding. The lessons of envy, pride, and malice had been laid bare before her, teaching the painful but necessary truth, that true strength is born not from dominance, but from patience, cleverness, and the courage to endure. The young woman's calm, deliberate revelation had transformed the household, and the village had witnessed the triumph of spirit over cruelty. In the quiet applause and murmured admiration of the villagers, she felt a sense of completion, a reckoning not fueled by anger, but by the undeniable power of truth, wisdom, and courage. The days after the public reckoning were filled with a quiet transformation in the household. The young woman moved through the home not as a victim, but as someone who carried the calm authority of earned respect. The hidden box, once a secret of mystery and revelation, became a symbol of renewal, its contents carefully used to restore balance and justice. She began by sharing small treasures from the box to improve the household, materials to repair worn furniture, tools to ease chores, and seeds to enrich the garden. Each gift was distributed with humility and thoughtfulness, creating a visible harmony that contrasted sharply with the envy and chaos of the past. Her stepsister watched cautiously, still grappling with the humiliation she had endured, yet slowly recognizing the strength and wisdom of her sibling. The young woman did not shame her in public or private. Instead, she set examples through action. She showed patience when mistakes were made, extended kindness where resentment had once festered, and offered guidance in ways that encouraged learning rather than competition. Over time, the stepsister began to respond, not out of fear but out of understanding. She realized that the jealousy she had carried had blinded her to the potential for cooperation, growth, and familial respect. The lessons of humility, so carefully illustrated through her sister's conduct, began to take root in her heart. The stepmother, too, witnessed the change with a mixture of astonishment and unease. The girl she had tried to belittle and control now moved through the household with quiet authority, earning admiration not through fear or manipulation, but through fairness, intelligence, and a visible calm that radiated in every interaction. Slowly, the household's dynamics shifted. The stepmother's sharp tongue softened, her commands became measured, and even her pride began to bend before the young woman's example. For the first time, the home felt less like a place of oppression and more like a space where respect and care guided behavior, rather than cruelty and envy. The young woman extended her influence beyond the walls of the household as well. Using the wisdom gleaned from the box, she aided neighbors and villagers with counsel and small acts of generosity. She offered advice to farmers struggling with their crops, shared herbs and remedies from her garden, and guided those who sought her insight with patience and empathy. Word of her actions spread steadily through the village, reinforcing her reputation as a person of wisdom, courage, and integrity. The family, once the center of whispers and judgment, now became a source of inspiration, demonstrating how cruelty can be transformed into care, envy into humility, and oppression into opportunity. In private moments, she spoke gently to her stepsister, showing that forgiveness and teaching could coexist. "The past cannot be undone," she said softly one evening, "but the future is ours to shape, if we choose patience, cleverness, and care." These words, reinforced by her actions, became the foundation upon which the stepsister began to rebuild her own character. She started helping willingly, contributing to chores and garden work without prompting, her envy gradually replaced by admiration and cooperation. Slowly, the household began to feel like a team, united not by fear but by shared purpose and respect. As harmony grew, the young woman felt a deep satisfaction that transcended material rewards. The box had been more than a treasure. It had been a teacher, a guide, and a key to understanding the power of patience, cleverness, and courage. She had endured malice, navigated deception, and reclaimed dignity, not through confrontation alone, but through strategy, empathy, and wisdom. The household, now functioning with respect and understanding, reflected the transformation she had orchestrated. The stepsister humbled, the stepmother moderated, and the young woman celebrated as a quiet yet undeniable force of resilience and virtue. By the time the sun set over the village, painting the fields in shades of gold, the household had become a place of peace, learning, and renewed relationships. The young woman's strength and intelligence had reshaped not only her own destiny but the lives of those who had once sought to diminish her. Harmony had been restored, and with it came the lasting respect, gratitude, and love of the family she had quietly guided toward wisdom. The treasures of the hidden box had fulfilled their purpose, but the true treasure lay in the lessons learned, the bonds mended, and the enduring legacy of patience, cleverness, and courage that now thrived within the household. The village had long relied on tradition to mark the passing seasons, but this gathering was unlike any other. Word had spread of the young woman's quiet wisdom, her cleverness in navigating household schemes, and the treasure she had discovered in the hidden box. Villagers, young and old, mothers with children and elders leaning on canes, gathered in the central square, curious and expectant. The young woman arrived carrying baskets filled with fruits, herbs, and grains from her garden, each item nurtured with care and reflecting her resilience and intelligence. She moved with the calm assurance of someone who had endured cruelty yet emerged not hardened, but generous and wise. The feast began under the open sky, long tables arranged with vibrant cloths and bowls brimming with the harvest of her labor. Villagers approached cautiously at first, their eyes reflecting awe and admiration. Mothers whispered about the patience and cleverness that had allowed her to reclaim dignity and transform her household, while children watched her with wide eyes, inspired by the grace with which she carried herself. The young woman invited everyone to partake in the meal, ensuring that the poor and marginalized were given equal attention. Every gesture, from the careful placement of the bowls to the gentle words shared with each family, radiated kindness and thoughtfulness, reinforcing the lessons she had learned from the hidden box and from her own trials. As the villagers ate, she began to speak, not in grand speeches, but in stories and lessons drawn from her experiences. She spoke of honesty, recounting how concealment and deceit had once allowed cruelty to flourish, but transparency and truth had the power to transform relationships and communities. She illustrated patience, explaining that endurance was not a passive state but an active force, a way to observe, understand, and eventually act with clarity and foresight. Her words carried weight because they were not theoretical. They were grounded in the very trials she had survived, in the cleverness that had allowed her to turn adversity into triumph, and in the wisdom gleaned from the letters and artifacts she had uncovered. Her stepsister, seated nearby, watched in silence, her previous envy tempered by awe and humility. She could not deny the strength and generosity that radiated from her sibling, and she began to understand the meaning of cooperation, respect, and honesty. The feast became a living lesson, a demonstration of how patience, cleverness, and courage could enrich not only oneself but an entire community. Villagers noticed the change in the household's dynamics, seeing the stepsister assisting willingly, the stepmother moderating her commands, and the young woman guiding with quiet authority rather than domination. The transformations within the home mirrored the broader lessons of the feast, showing that resilience and generosity could create harmony wherever they were applied. By mid-afternoon, the celebration had become more than a meal. It was a festival of learning and inspiration. Children laughed as they chased each other between the tables, elders shared stories of their own past struggles, and villagers exchanged gratitude for the young woman's guidance and generosity. She moved among them, offering advice, sharing stories from the hidden box, and encouraging curiosity, patience, and cleverness in all matters. Her presence was a reminder that wisdom was not confined to the wealthy or powerful but was accessible to those who observed carefully, acted thoughtfully, and nurtured both knowledge and compassion. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the village, the young woman stood in quiet satisfaction. The Feast of Secrets was more than a celebration of her cleverness and generosity, it was a demonstration of the principles she held dear: honesty, patience, and the clever use of knowledge. The villagers departed with full hearts and inspired minds, carrying lessons that would ripple through their homes, shaping not only the present but the generations to come. And in the midst of it all, the young woman understood that the true treasure was not the hidden box or the riches it contained, but the enduring legacy of wisdom, kindness, and cleverness she had shared with her people. Long after the young woman had transformed her household and inspired the village, her story continued to live in the hearts and minds of the people. The elders, guardians of memory and tradition, recounted the tale of her discovery, the hidden box, and the cleverness, patience, and courage that had allowed her to turn cruelty into triumph. Around fires at night, in the shade of ancient trees, and during communal gatherings, they spoke of how she had endured the stepsister's envy and the stepmother's schemes, yet never lost sight of her own integrity and wisdom. Her name became synonymous with resilience and intelligence, a guiding example for those who faced hardship or injustice. The hidden box itself, once a secret of mystery, had become a symbol of opportunity, of the unseen strength that lies in perseverance and insight. Children were told to pay attention to the small details, to listen to whispers of guidance, and to trust the wisdom that comes from observation and patience. Mothers reminded their daughters of the young woman who had quietly endured suffering but had used knowledge and cleverness to reclaim her dignity. Fathers spoke to their sons about the importance of respect, humility, and fair judgment, using her story as a lesson in the consequences of envy, pride, and cruelty. The village, once bound by superstition and fear of misfortune, now embraced the principles of honesty, patience, and strategic cleverness as pathways to harmony and success. Her stepsister, who had once been the architect of her suffering, became a living testament to the power of humility. She worked alongside her sister, learning through experience that malice could never triumph over quiet intelligence and moral strength. The stepmother, too, found a measure of reflection and restraint, realizing that dominance and fear could not create lasting respect. The young woman's actions had reshaped the household, turning a place of jealousy and cruelty into a home of cooperation and mutual regard. The hidden box had not only revealed treasures but had become the catalyst for lasting transformation, teaching the household and the village alike that true strength is often invisible until revealed through patience and courage. Generations later, her name was still spoken with reverence. Children played in the gardens she had tended, imagining the secret box hidden beneath the earth, and dreaming of the cleverness and courage it had inspired. Elders recounted her story with pride, emphasizing how she had turned adversity into opportunity, humiliation into strategy, and envy into a lesson in moral insight. The legacy she left behind was not material wealth, but a pattern of thought, a blueprint for resilience, and a demonstration of how wisdom and patience could outshine cruelty and malice. In every corner of the village, her story became a touchstone for courage and cleverness. The hidden box had been her guide, but it was her heart, mind and spirit that made her legend endure. She became a symbol, a reminder that the strongest treasures are often those hidden within oneself, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Her triumph over adversity and the lessons she shared ensured that her name, and the wisdom of the hidden box, would inspire generations long after her footsteps faded from the village paths, leaving behind a legacy of hidden strength, insight and enduring resilience. The young woman, now celebrated throughout the village for her wisdom, patience and cleverness, felt a quiet fulfillment as she moved through the gardens she had tended with care. Each flower, each herb, each thriving crop was a testament not only to her labor but to her endurance through years of cruelty and neglect. The hidden box had revealed the truths of her lineage, the lessons of her ancestors, and the path she could follow to reclaim dignity and restore harmony. But more than that, it had shown her that courage is not loud, nor triumph instantaneous. It is quiet, steady and cultivated through patience, insight and faith. Even as her household settled into a new rhythm, with her stepsister learning humility and her stepmother moderating her once domineering ways, the young woman knew that true triumph lay not in revenge, but in the wisdom to transform envy and cruelty into lessons for all. She moved among the villagers with the same gentle authority she had exhibited at the Feast of Secrets, guiding them with counsel, sharing resources, and teaching the subtle arts of patience and cleverness. Mothers brought their daughters to her for guidance, young men sought her insight in times of uncertainty, and elders nodded with quiet approval, knowing that she had inherited and perfected the wisdom of generations. Yet it was not her fame that defined her, it was the courage she had cultivated through betrayal and humiliation. Every challenge she had faced, from the burning of her clothes to the schemes of her stepsister and stepmother, had been a forge, shaping her spirit into one capable of withstanding cruelty without surrendering to it. She had learned to see malice for what it was, to act not with rashness but with strategy, and to reclaim her dignity through thoughtful deeds that spoke louder than words. Her intelligence had allowed her to outmaneuver envy, her patience had preserved her calm in the face of spite, and her courage had ensured that she never abandoned her principles or her vision of fairness. The hidden box, now carefully secured and revered, remained a symbol of the truth she had unearthed. Letters, artifacts, and tokens of wisdom had guided her, but it was the application of their lessons that had created her legacy. She understood now that treasures, whether material or spiritual, hold power only when combined with cleverness, patience, and moral courage. And as the seasons changed, the village flourished under her guidance, not because she sought control, but because she had learned the value of shared knowledge, empathy, and quiet leadership. Even the children who once marveled at the story of the hidden box now understood its deeper lesson, that strength is cultivated in silence and revealed through thoughtful action. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the young woman stood atop the small hill near her garden, overlooking the village she had helped transform. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a gentle reminder of the ancestors who had guided her. She felt their presence in the rustle of leaves, the shimmer of light on the river, and the soft murmur of villagers' voices in the distance. It was a moment of serene reflection, a recognition that her journey had been both personal and universal, a story that would inspire courage in those who came after her. Even her stepsister, now reconciled to her place and humbled by the lessons she had learned, approached her with genuine respect. There was no bitterness, no lingering envy, only the understanding that true strength is revealed not by triumphing over others, but by cultivating wisdom, patience, and courage within oneself. The stepmother, too, watched with a mixture of awe and reflection, acknowledging that her own harshness had been tempered by the young woman's example. The household had been transformed not by punishment, but by the quiet force of integrity and insight, proving that courage and cleverness can illuminate even the darkest corners of envy and cruelty. In the quiet of the evening, the young woman spoke to those gathered, her voice calm and steady, carrying a message that would echo long after the sun had set. Even when betrayed and humiliated, when envy seeks to diminish and cruelty seeks to destroy, remember this: courage does not always roar, cleverness does not always flash, and faith does not always shine at once. But when combined, they reveal truths that cannot be hidden, triumphs that cannot be stolen, and strength that endures beyond all hardship. Her words were received in reverent silence, the villagers sensing the weight and wisdom behind each syllable. Children looked to her with wide, inspired eyes, elders nodded with approval, and mothers whispered to their daughters about the quiet power of patience, cleverness, and moral courage. It was a moment that transcended time, a lasting lesson embedded in the hearts of all who heard it. As night fell, the stars emerged, sparkling in the heavens above the village. The young woman gazed upward, her heart swelling with gratitude and resolve. She understood now that her journey was both an end and a beginning, the culmination of trials that had shaped her, and the foundation for lessons that would guide generations to come. The hidden box had revealed treasures, but the true treasure was her spirit, the courage to endure, the cleverness to navigate adversity, and the faith to trust in herself and the unseen guidance of those who came before. And so, the legend of the young woman endured. She became the star of courage, a symbol of strength, wisdom, and resilience, reminding all who followed that even when the world conspires against us, when envy burns and cruelty strikes, courage, cleverness, and faith can reveal hidden truths and illuminate the path to triumph. Her story became a beacon, a poem written in actions and integrity, ensuring that no shadow of malice could ever obscure the light of a determined and virtuous heart.